interesting discussion around distressed M&A. Now, India's Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code has created a formal market for distressed debt in India. The IBC has intensified distressed M&A activity in India with deals worth 14.3 billion US dollars completed between 2016 and 2018 since the implementation of the code. This accounted for a significant 12% of total M&A value. In today's interview, we would like to discuss the role played by IBC in distress acquisitions, the CIRP process to settle such acquisitions, and the impact of the pandemic on these acquisitions. To help us understand all of this, we have with us on LawWiser today, Mr. Jayesh H, who is the co-founder of the law firm Juris Corp. Hi, Jayesh. Thank you so much for taking our time for us today.
Thank you, Lavanya. Thank you for this opportunity.
So I'm going to dive right into it with the first question. Just to help our audience understand, can you tell us what is distressed M&A?
Okay, thank you for that, Lavanya. So when you say distress M&A, what comes to my mind is a company which is in financial distress. At times, it could even be product and other marketing issues or whatever other distress, operational and not necessarily financial. But most of the times, we are talking of a company which is in financial distress and therefore is looking to either sell off a business or get it acquired in its entirety, etc. Now, without getting into IBC, distress M&As are not that rarity in India, but earlier it was, the bankers or the investment banker telling the promoter, why don't you sell off a business line, or why don't you sell off a subsidiary, or why don't you sell off one of your group companies so the rest can be protected. And it used to be called distress in the sense that because they knew that the seller is in a urgency or as far as funds are concerned or whatever, and therefore is compelled to sell, so to speak, and will be wanting to do the deal faster than later, so to speak. Of course, IBC has changed the notion of distressed M&A, so to speak. Financially distressed companies are put into a regime which allows the company to be taken over. And it took the market a long time to understand that what is now known as distressed M&A is actually nothing but two things at work: LBOs, leveraged buyouts, and hostile takeovers. So let me dive deep into both these concepts one after the other. Leverage buyouts is basically, let's say, assume you have a company, 1 billion valuation, and imagine you only put in 100 million, which is like 10%, and you're able to buy out the company because you're leveraging the value of the company itself to get yourself funded. And I'm not getting to the mechanics of LBOs, but the market took a long time to understand that the a resolution under IBC is nothing but a leverage buyout. In fact, when the IBC was getting introduced, we actually went around making presentation to clients that this is nothing but a disguised LBO and nothing but a disguised hostile takeover, and yet people took time to get understand really what is going on. So Ruchi Soya is a classic example of what is a leverage buyout because a lot of negative press has been created. The new acquirers, so to speak, hardly put in any money and look how much money they're making. But that's how leverage buyouts work. That you leverage the banking system to finance the acquisition of an asset, and where your own equity you put in is very low, but you're taking a risk, of course. The hostile takeover part is very interesting because as a country, we've been hostile to hostile takeovers. I've said this earlier also, and I was involved in one more than 20 years back, and the unfortunate outcome was the laws got amended to make it even more difficult to make hostile takeovers of listed companies and so on. So here you have IBC, which sort of created a backdoor entry for hostile takeovers to happen because you are throwing the current promoters out, you are letting a new acquirer come in and take over the company and run it and all of that. And that's why it's called an hostile takeover. So you should see a distress M&A under IBC, that is, as an amalgam of LBOs and hostile takeovers. In fact, globally, LBOs invariably are hostile in nature. But in India, before IBC, neither were there LBOs happening, leverage buyouts, nor were there hostile takeovers really happening. So IBO has opened the door for that to happen. And if I may stick my neck out, most of the cases we have seen so far have been cases which should have been resolved like 5 or 10 years earlier, if not much earlier. and therefore what we call basket cases, and therefore the value destruction has been high and the what has been realized by the creditors has been low. But now we'll slowly start seeing the new companies, I mean the new cases where people are taking in faster, the value destruction not being so high, and the creditors are recovering much higher value. So, but as we go along the conversation today, I'll touch upon that more. Back to you, Lavanya. I hope this was helpful.
Yes, thank you so much. Jayesh, you've touched upon IBC already, and let's just go a bit into detail. Can you share an overview of the role that IBC has played in distress M&A? Like we were
Yes.
saying, it's not like it's something new. It's just
Yes.
that once IBC has come, it's just that the process and what it all means and how things work out, all of that has changed.
Yes. So what IBC does as a process is you have a third party come in and take over the management of the company, the resolution professional, who is, and you have a new set of players as sort of the board of directors equivalent, which is a committee of creditors. So between the committee of creditors and the resolution professional, they start effectively managing the company, right? And issue an RFP, request for proposal, where they set out the description of the company, like a prospectus, so to speak, inviting for bids to take over the company, which is in the form of a resolution plan. So I'm not getting into the jargon, the technicalities, and the process in detail, but I'm saying more from a commercial perspective what really happens. So the erstwhile promoter has no longer an ability to run the company, but from a legal perspective, the board of directors get suspended. So it's a resolution professional who's supposed to run the company under the supervision and reporting to the committee of creditors. But it's not like he's an agent of them. Our resolution professional works in his own right. He has substantive powers vested in him by law. But at the same time, there's a significant supervisory role created for the committee of creditors, because a lot of things are determined by them voting upon as to which route to adopt and what not, etc. So, for example, the committee of creditors may determine the method of scoring which the bidders will be evaluated upon, and then decide whom they will, vote for, and again put to vote which bid is to be accepted on all of that. So, what the law has done is, for distressed companies, obviously, which are taken under the IBC, ring fence the company from the promoters and the board of directors, and allow a third party agency, so to speak, which is the resolution professional and the committee of creditors, to run the company for the interim period and then identify the new sort of owners of the company, so to speak, whose bid is getting accepted, and then they take over the company, which is of course subject to the approval of the National Company Law Tribunal. But that's a process part of it. But in substance, this is what happens. Now, the law expected this to be done in 180 days to maximum 270 days, but that's an exception, unfortunately, not the norm, the timeline wise, and that again sort of impacts the value which can get realized. The faster you do this, the better the value you can realize, so to speak. But again, in a nutshell, so you are having an ability to bid for a company on a non-friendly basis, because it's not that you have to sit with the promoter and negotiate the deal with him. That also still happens under IBC. In some cases, we suspect the acquirer has nothing been but a friend or a affiliate or associate or whatever you want to call it of the erstwhile promoter. But in most cases, it is a non-friendly bid, which where a person can come in and take over a company and run it as their own, and benefit from the value realization. And Ruchi Soya is again a classic example of that.
Thank you. My next question is, can you help us understand what are the risks involved in distress M&A activity? And then again, going back to IBC, how has this changed in any way after within the IBC regime?
So thank you, Lavanya. And let's first talk about distress M&A outside of IBC to better understand what value IBC has added in this context. When you're doing a distress M&A, you're always concerned, are all the liabilities being fully disclosed to you, financial and others also. You could have environmental liability, you could have non-compliance related liabilities and penalties getting imposed and whatnot, right? And of course, the financial ones, you don't know whether some guarantees have been given by the corporate debtor, so to speak, right? The target you want to acquire and all that. So you never get a full clarity or full certainty on what all liabilities are you taking over, etc. And then you have to also sit and negotiate with those creditors and reduction of liabilities. And while you may be able to do so with the financial creditors, because especially banks and all that, and there were some mechanisms earlier which enabled that, it's not at all practical to do those negotiations with the government and other statutory authorities. IBC has changed all of that. It has made it much easier. I'm not saying it is really easy, but compared to what it was, it has become much easier on two fronts. One is getting clarity on what all liabilities are there, because what happens is IBC does a whitewash. Even if there are unstated liabilities in the RFP, etc., the acquirer is not going to be saddled with them. It's a clean break. Acquirer only assumes the liabilities which is explicitly setting out in the resolution plan. I mean, there are some anomalies there which still need to be sorted, but those are still, compared to the earlier position, they're much smaller in the bigger scheme of things, so not to worry about. So one is getting clarity on the liabilities, what you're really taking on, and you value the company accordingly and you put a bid accordingly. Second is the approval process. The financial creditors get to vote, and they vote on behalf of all the creditors, including, shocking as it may sound, including on behalf of the government and the statutory authorities and whatnot. Of course, there have been some anomalies like the airline company and the telecom dues and all of that. And, in at least in one of those cases, I wish the law had gone a different way, or other the judicial pronouncement, but be it as it may be. I mean, that's maybe an exception to the rule if you look at it in value terms, and even in terms of number of cases, that the financial creditors, as part of the committee of creditors, effectively vote which plan to approve and what haircut gets applied, not only to financial creditors but even to the operational creditors, the supplier of goods and services, income tax, GST, any other statutory dues or governmental dues, like a mining lease, outstanding payments, and all of that. So you have a single window process, so to speak, to get all the approvals in one shot. I would say, when I say this, about 90% of the approvals or whatever, because you still have to go and get the lease amended to, because there's a change of control and stuff like that. But if you ask me on ease of doing business perspective, if earlier it was like 20 to 30 out of 100, now we're like at 85 to 95 and 100 compared to, in doing a distressed M&A. So that's the sea change which the IBC has brought about. A, clarity on what liabilities are you taking on, B, the consent process happening.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. My last question for today, although this is a really interesting topic, we should talk more about this again. But for today, I just want to ask you, before you go, what are the opportunities for investors to engage in distress M&A in the recovery phase of this pandemic, and in the near, what do you see in the near future? I think the pandemic and its after effects are here to stay for, I don't know, maybe even another 4 to 5 years. Can you comment a bit on that?
So, Lavanya, thank you for that. And before I do that, let me just add to the earlier question a couple of aspects. To be clear, I'm not saying everything is hunky dory and perfect, picture perfect, and all of that. There are some still significant issues under IBC which are coming in the way of value maximization. While the law is very clear that you have to maximize the value of the assets so the creditors benefit, often the parties involved are not operating that way. We still operate from, let's give it another chance, let's not be too harsh, etc. So the time taken to admit the company itself is too long, and that itself ends up having significant value destruction. And why this is relevant to the question you asked is because till we don't rectify that, the step up in M&A will not be that much, and even the values which will realize will still be suboptimal. So for a greater amount of distress M&A to happen, and also for a better value realization, it is critical that there is a greater sensitization, of the parties, that be all the various stakeholders, including the process and the tribunals, as to what the delay really is amounting to and whom does it really cost, etc. And what I don't understand, one thing which is still baffles me, when the late Arun Jaitley had talked about this proposed law, he had actually said a new insolvency law will also improve India's enforcement of legal contracts, in other words, sanctity of contracts. But I think that still has been lost. We are still operating from a socialistic mindset. Let's give the parties another chance, and not really from, if you have consumed goods or services, or if you borrowed money, you knew when you had to pay. So why did you not pay up on time, and why should you be given a chance and whatnot? So till that doesn't change, there is going to be a significant impact. Now, coming to your question really as to what are the opportunities and pandemic driven and all of that, if I may give a very weird analogy, as I often when I'm coming to office and I see what's happening on the road, I'm seeing a lot of shops have shut down, right? But I'm also seeing like new businesses are getting coming up in the same premises. So yes, the shops or the services shut down because of the pandemic, not able to afford the rent and all of that, and therefore they've gone out of business or they've shrunk the business or whatever. But somebody else new is coming down. Till we don't accept that, and which is what we need to accept, that if somebody is going to go out of business, somebody else will come and take the place, but that benefits the economy as a whole. So this is a huge opportunity. Yes, we feel bad for the people who've been affected by the pandemic and had to shut down the business or incur losses, etc., whatever. But if you allow the market to operate freely, and I'm not saying in a ruthless manner, obviously not, you need to take care of those who are literally out of work and are not able to afford 2 meals a day and all of that the society needs to deal with. That's a different issue. But by prolonging sickness, by keeping alive businesses which have inability now and not able to deal run themselves, you're only making it worse. But by allowing them to ease out faster, you're allowing new businesses to come in. So I know this is a sort of a long-winded explanation, but this is what I'm literally seeing almost every day on the streets as I drive to office and back. I thought it's useful to give an analogy. So similarly, like, while we had this moratorium on new cases, right? Now what will matter is when people start filing new applications, the usual defense will be that, oh, but you know what, I defaulted for the first time during the moratorium period, and that default is continued. Okay, but the point is, okay, you owed somebody money, say you owed 25 million, say in August last year, and you defaulted during the moratorium, right? But you still owe that money and that default continues. Is that going to be treated as a permanent whitewash? Because therefore I never have to pay, whoever had defaulted during the moratorium period, I never have to pay? Or because it's a continuing default, it is going to be treated as a new default, and therefore it's a ground for admitting the application. That is going to make a big difference as to what cases turn up. That's one. Secondly, let's assume somebody defaulted on the same 25 million in Jan of 2021. Okay, but that person's argument is, what, people owed me money, what, this happened, that happened, and because of during the moratorium I didn't get the money, and therefore this default has happened. And if we start taking a sympathetic view, which some tribunals in the past have taken, right? Then therefore this is connected to the default which happened to the moratorium, therefore the moratorium applies, therefore you cannot admit the petition. Then, almost every second case, if not every case, will fall into this basket, so to speak. Then there will not be any new opportunities. Now, keeping that aside, let's assume that is not the interpretation. Let's hope so. The tribunals apply. Then what are we looking at is significant opportunities from a distress M&A, including when it becomes clear that this is the approach tribunals will take. There'll be more promoters who are willing to cut a deal without getting into IBC, because then they get to have a say. They may get to earn some money as non-compete fees, or they may get to continue have some stake and have some say in management and share some of the upside with the incoming acquirer and all of that. And that is what we really need to be driving towards, because then the lenders and the other creditors get higher recoveries only when it becomes clear to promoters that if I don't play ball, if I don't do deals on a collaborative basis now, then I will be taken into IBC where I'd get nothing out of it for myself. So it's a very peculiar objective I'm driving at. The more stringently we enforce IBC, greater the chance and the greater the instances where many deals will get done pre-IBC, which will actually result in value maximization. That is something, I wish I could do something about sensitizing the various stakeholders, etc. But maybe some other platform and opportunity for that. But I hope I've answered your query. But if there's any aspect you want to, do a supplementary, I'm more than happy to do so. Thank you, Lavanya.
Thank you so much, Jayesh. That was really helpful. And I think you've explained really well and kind of covered a whole lot of aspects and how they all come together. So thank you for your time today. And we hope to have you back on LawWiser really soon.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Glad to have get connected.